Welcome to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast, where we dive deep into the emotions and experiences that shape us. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today we're exploring a topic that touches all of us at some point in our lives: the profound impact of loss. Loss is a universal experience, yet one of the most isolating journeys we can undertake. It carries a weight that often triggers existential questions and a deep reassessment of our own life's meaning. The way we grieve and process loss is deeply personal, yet society often imposes expectations and pressures about the right way to handle it. There's this underlying notion that we need to grieve in a certain way, or even worse, that we need to emerge from our grief having transformed in some significant pattern or way or shift, living more intensely or somehow better. Joining us today to unpack these complex feelings is Cait Pearson. Cait is not only a fear mindset coach, but a writer, a podcast host, and photographer. Her unique approach is all about confronting and understanding fear, not as an obstacle, but as a potential source of courage. Through her work, Cait illuminates less considered perspectives, revealing the often overlooked stories that fear presents us, distracting us from deeper hidden truths of our subconscious. Today, Cait will help us explore how loss can catalyze these fears and what it means to confront both the grief and the expectations that come with it by sharing some of her own shame, fears, and questions. So let's dive in. Cait, I feel like I've been waiting for us to record this since before I even had a podcast. Since we met for your podcast like 4 years ago, I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. The feeling is mutual. Seriously, when I got your email, it was like my soul just opened up and was like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Like, yes, we've been waiting for this because, yeah, even on my show, like we could have talked for hours and hours and hours. And so when this came as an opportunity, I was like, 10,000%. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
and it was cool because we were doing it virtually, but we were both in Portland and like probably 15 minutes of a drive from each other.
Totally.
But I don't think I'd had the experience at that point where I met someone and was like, oh, you can transcend technology with connection. Like I can feel a connection to this person that I don't want to say we speak the same language, but just this idea of like we are both interested in diving deep into these areas that I don't often find someone that would jump with me and who would jump and also be willing to explore and call out something different or go their own way or have an opposite view. Like it was so raw and beautiful. And I think that's who you are now that I've come to know you in different ways. Like I think people that meet you are all probably like, what's this magic? What is she doing to me? And why do I feel this way?
I wish that was everybody's response. But oftentimes when you're talking, you're like, wow. So tell me more about that hesitation under there. Is that fear I'm sensing?
Yeah.
I'm great at parties. No, but I feel the exact same way. I am the person that I am always willing. I always, inside of the work that I do, inside of the relationships I have, I think it's important to hold space for the uncomfortability of what it means to be human. And those are some of my favorite moments. And all of my friends, even just today, reflected back to me that like, I'm willing to stay, that I will ground us and I will hold us here. And whatever you need to say and whatever comes up inside of that space, it's like a safety container that I hold so sacred. For the people that not only that I work with, but the people in my life. And something that I often say is like inside of these, I want it to always feel like we're just going on a walk together. Like it's nothing more than, because it's already inherently like being a human and doing all the things. It's already inherently vulnerable. Yeah. And so fear and all the stuff, it's just like, am I doing it right? Did I say something dumb? It's like, that's already going on inside of my head. I don't have to add anything more to that. I just have to stay. And as many times as I can, just give that notion of like, is this something that, do you want to go on a walk with me? Like, do you want to go on a walk with me? Because it's like, I know the layout of this neighborhood. I'm very comfortable inside of that stickiness of being a human. And
Mm-hmm.
so inside of fear, inside of shame. That's why I'm very excited about this. It's like I'm comfortable there, and so it's like, will you walk with me through this neighborhood? Because I can promise you, there's no unsafe street. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
just not. And that's just such a lovely thing. And thank you so much for that reflection, because I immediately, in having that conversation with you, felt the exact same way. I was like, it is
Mm-hmm.
so cool, especially because even being who I am and being willing to hold that space, it's like, it's intense. And some people are like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I can't go there. I don't want to do that. And walking through my own journey of accepting myself and accepting this part of me that I've not only come to accept, but to love. And that's
Mm-hmm.
not always safe, or it's not always accepted in certain situations. So especially when you meet somebody that will go on that walk with you,
Yeah.
that will not only go on the walk with you, but also help steer where we're going in a way
Yeah.
that like incites more curiosity and more depth. You're like, heck yeah, like let's
Yeah.
go. And instantly when I met you, that's how I felt too. Like, yes, let's do it.
Well, you said that's so interesting too, is I think, again, that sort of kindred spirit piece of this is really inherent in who we are. And we've both, through experiences that happened that we witnessed, through our own experiences, we've shaped ourselves to be this way for different reasons, to serve different purposes. And when you're that person in a group of people that are either afraid of it, so they're running, or they like it, and so they really want it, it can still be lonely because you don't necessarily have people around that are like, well, why don't you walk with me? I'll take you in my neighborhood for a minute and I can promise you that you'll be safe. And so you do a lot of holding for other people. And that's also really hard. And so I think when you find someone else where you can tell the depth is there, but also I'm not as exhausted because I love it. I mean, we both do. Like, again, same thing. Like, let me be there for you. But also sometimes I'm really fucking tired and I want to set the cup down and I don't want to hold it. And I don't want to tell you that you're going to be okay because right now I don't feel like I'm going to be okay. And yeah, I know the streets and all of that. And so I think there's also some relief when you find someone who maybe understands that, because it's a lot of work and it is very lonely, even though the connection you get through that process can feel really deep and meaningful.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm like, I don't know if I could even put, that's just so poignant. And it's like it's intense. And when you can hold that well, like that
Yeah.
well for people, you're like, but where does my cup get filled? Like, where
Right.
is that for me? And yeah, it is exhausting. It's a lot. And like one of my core values is that people deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. And
Mm,
that is something that you don't have to earn with me. It's not something
right.
that but in holding that value so close to my chest, it is like very exhausting sometimes, and being extremely mindful of my own boundaries and not allowing the shame of holding that boundary
Yes.
to like make me feel anything less than, like I'm not living inside of my integrity if I don't constantly hold
Right.
that core value above my own, mental, physical health when I'm just done. Like
Yeah.
it's a fine balance, that's for sure, especially in the work that we both do. But it's cool, like you said, when you find somebody where it's like, oh, you can choose left or right this time. Like
Yep.
you can do it. And I trust you because of this rapport and this energy and this connection where it's like, oh, it's just going to get better from here. And I trust that you can take the reins because I can feel that you get it.
Yeah. Which I think is why when we were talking about, I don't know, the 804 left or right turns we could make for this conversation, knowing that even just picking one direction, we said offline, our biggest problem is going to be that I have to make sure I watch the time because I could talk to you forever. I mean, I got so excited when the conversation around grief and loss came up because I do think it is something that again, feels like such a lonely experience, but also you want to hold space. You know that everybody is going through that, especially when you're working with people around fear. Like they've had loss, likely very real, very raw loss, or they've witnessed it and they're living in this state of sort of existential angst of when that loss is going to happen. But you've had your own stuff. You've gone through your own things. And sometimes, and I don't know if this happens to you, I'm making an assumption because it happens to me where because I am the person that's there for other people, it's almost like I get, I don't know, like roboticized in a way. Like they forget that I don't necessarily have it figured out for me. And or sometimes I don't want to have it figured out for me. I want someone else to just hold the space, especially with these topics. And so, yeah, just thinking about all that and thinking about your own experiences with this, what made you go, why was this topic important? Why was loss and grief sort of in that space of, yeah, we need to explore that because there is so much shame, there is so much fear, there is so much loneliness there that I deserve to unpack, but also I want to support the people I'm holding the cup for so they can unpack it too.
Yeah, it's because um it's like the what is that? What am I going for? Like it's like the first fear, or it's like the built-in fear. It's like
Mm,
this when in everything, it's like, oh, there's constant, am I doing enough? Am
right,
I doing
right.
enough for what? For the life that you have because you only get one? Like, it's this constant thing that lives in the back of everybody's head is like, am I doing, and with all of my experience with grief and loss and the countless people that I have lost in my life of only short 33 years, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're constantly, and especially as you get older, but I think in the world that we live in today, from younger and younger of an age, unfortunately, we are getting exposed to and to the idea that this experience, this, group project that we're all doing, that is life,
Mm,
it's not guaranteed.
yeah.
And so, but from a younger and younger age, this like the ultimate fear of when is this going to be over?
Mm-hmm.
And I might not know, and I might not have any control over it. And then also, obviously, in proximity to the people that are in your circle and in your family that might have, you know, just tragedy happen in that
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. It's just like, it's the thing we can never run away from. It's the
Right.
thing that you can't push it down deep enough because it's just there.
Yeah.
And so when you ask me about like what feels like what calls to me, I think that this is, I think it's like the ultimate conversation, frankly, because
Mm,
it's just, if you can reorient your relationship to the thing,
mm-hmm.
then I think that gives you an awareness and a power and like an autonomy about your life that inherently makes you feel a little bit more inside of your own skin.
Yeah.
And so, given this opportunity to talk about it, especially, I mean, I have lost so many friends to drugs and to suicide and to like accidents. And like I said, I'm only 33, and to have to not only face this like ultimate fear, as I've called it for myself, but what it means when it's just staring back at you in the face for people that are your age, are younger than you, are
Mm-hmm.
that like, that's something you're like, how do I come to terms with how I want to live my life and how I should be living my life
Mm-hmm.
when this fear that's constantly living back there um, is just being brought to the surface over and over and over and
Mm-hmm.
over again. And like you said, it's like I'm not the only one going through it then too. So this robotic sense of people come to you for answers, and
Right.
I'm like, wow, okay, so I'm going to hold space for me, but I'm going to hold space for you. And then how do I do both and not completely essentially ruin myself?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not going to lie, there's a couple of times where I'm like, this is too raw. It's
It's too
too
much.
raw.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Because it sounds like there's sort of 3 layers in my head that I'm thinking about, because that sort of ultimate core fear is we're going to die. Like, we individually will die at some point. We can't control it. We don't know when. That's so overwhelming and painful. Then the second layer is people around me are going to die. And that's also overwhelming and painful, but it's in a totally different way. Because this idea of like, my life is going to stop and I can't control it and I don't know when, puts you in that sort of existential space. The loss of everyone around you still makes you feel out of control. But then the idea is, I have to constantly redesign my life by taking, this person is gone, this relationship is gone, these norms are gone, this whatever it is, I'm designing a new life. And the pressure starts to feel like, so I have to make sure that it's meaningful. As I'm reading, it's like every iteration of this has to be more purposeful, more meaningful. And I think about that song. I don't know who sings it, but the like, live like you were dying. Like,
Chris
I went
Daughtry. Chris Daughtry.
And I think about that all the time. And I'm like, well, I don't want to skydive every day. Like, I do still think I need to save for retirement. Like, I can't just be like, fuck it. But also, like, I don't know, people die. And I thought about that. Like, when my cousin, who was 2 weeks younger than me, was killed, and he was 22, I think, or 23 at the time, very young, early 20s.
Wow.
And it was that feeling that you described of like, well, I have to make my life mean something because it could be taken away. And now I have to honor this person's life and their values and make it mean something. Well, I'm also trying to grieve in a certain way. And then the third layer is when you're describing and holding this space for other people, oftentimes those people are experiencing the same loss as you. So now you're trying to hold an open container for them to process it, to feel okay, when you're still trying to process the same loss. Likely that relationship's going to be changing. And it's just, it's so much. And I guess maybe the fourth layer I hadn't even thought about is it's not just death. We have to deal with this with so much loss in general. And so it just can become, it sounds like to you, you experienced this really young and your fear brain took it and ran with it a little bit, and it put a lot of pressure on you.
Totally.
Was most of that, do you think, sort of an internal response, like just how your body was trying to manage these painful things? And, or do you think it was fueled by the responses and the people around you too, and kind of amplified that position?
Yeah, I think that me personally, from a very young age, I was paying attention to a lot of things and how people were taking this in and what they were doing with it and or not doing with it, maybe.
Yeah.
And that to me, inherently with just about everything in my life, makes me want to pay even more attention to what's going on. And because given the dynamics inside of my family when I was growing up, I was responsible for a lot very early on. So it was like this inherent need for preparation, especially given, like from high school, like just knowing kids that got involved with drugs, that overdosed and things like that. And so you're just exposed to it. And so you're just trying to prepare. Essentially, I felt like I was just trying to prepare myself for, the inevitability of life. Like the sooner that I can stare this in the face, then I guess the better. And ultimately, that's true. And also it made me like desensitized to my own grief process and like my own like pain throughout that. So being able to hold space for people became very natural for me, but then it suppressed all of it. Instead of feeling the feelings of grief, I took it a whole nother level, which was essentially, like you were saying, this like propulsion into, well, because they're not here, then I have to do something like with that. I had a very, 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 very close friend of mine die when I was in 11th grade. He had an enlarged heart and he collapsed on a basketball court. And I mean, nobody could have, you can't know, and nobody could have saw it coming, and we couldn't have done anything about it. And like to this day, I carry these people with me sometimes it feels like on my back, because it's like, you can't, so I will. And I really think that that became something that influenced me heavily throughout my life, instead of actually processing the grief, because I was in this preparation mode from a very young age. And so that like it's such a, I mean, I know I'm not alone in that, inside of that dynamic. And so it's like, whether it happened for me at a young age or it happens to other people at whatever time in their life, when you start to not feel or get the space to feel your full feelings about things, then if you don't have a safe place to put it, then of course you're not practiced in doing it. So, but it's still there. So then how do you deal with it? And me, it was like, okay, then I'm going to create a life that's worth living, that's going to make a difference, even when it sucks, even when it's hard. It's like becoming a martyr of my own life because of people that have died.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's sort of this domino effect of you becoming parentified and having, I don't think adultified is a word, but sort of an emotional adultification process. Yeah. Well, that's a very technical therapeutic term. Y'all may not have heard that before. It's very, very high level. Yeah. But I think it's this idea where, you were already, prior to a lot of this loss, conditioning yourself to put yourself on the back burner because your job was to take care of other people who your brain was perceiving needed it more. Like you said, they can't, so I will. But it was with people around you that it's like, they don't have the capacity. They can't take this on. It's now my responsibility. And you sort of got charged with that. So the environment is basically co-created by you and anyone around you, where over time, they just kind of stop asking about you because Cait's fine. Cait's got it figured out. Cait's there when we need something, but like, we don't have to worry about her. Everything's great. And so when the loss happens, you experience it. Probably somebody asked you at some point, like, how are you doing? And you probably said, fine. Part of you wanting someone to push harder, like, fine is not real. I know you're not fine. Tell me what's going on. But the environment was conditioned where fine was all they were looking for, because now it wasn't a norm for them to ask you how you were. It wasn't a norm for them to expect you weren't fine. And then it became protective. So you needed that. You needed somebody to not poke, because now it gets too big after a while.
Totally.
So then you're kind of running your own marathon race of just trying to pick up everybody who can't live, whether they've died or the people around you are stuck. You're like, I got it. I'll haul you. I'm running with 38 people on my back, but like, I'll pick you up too. Still part of you wanting someone just to say, I'll grab a few off your back. Or what if you set them down for a minute? Because now that part is, well, this is my role. This is my job. This is how I'm oriented in this world around me. So if I can't do this, what is my worth and value? And on top of feeling identityless, I'll have to feel all this shit that I've told myself that I can't feel, that I'm watching nobody else around me can take on. And I've got to figure that out on my own with nobody else helping me carry that.
Yep.
That's not safe. I'm just going to keep running.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's like you kind of do this for a living or something, Kyira. It's weird. It's weird how good you are at that. I'm like, I don't know if anybody's ever put it that clearly or concisely for me in my life. And no, but you're at all of that is just like, I'm like, wow, did you have a portal into my entire first part of my experience of living? Because you truly, like, you couldn't have put it more clearly. And it's taken me a lot of time to be able to, and a lot of therapy to be able to give myself the opportunity to be an actual human in the world too. And like we were saying before we started recording, I think, or maybe it was during the recording, like expressing these boundaries and being like, no, I don't have enough right now. I don't have this space. And I inherently deserve to give myself a break too, and not make it mean anything about me. And a little bit of what you were saying is like, yeah, this story that you just described is uniquely mine. But I think that in this age group, I don't know if it's where like we just put a lot on our backs. Because we, for whatever reason, it's like, oh, well, we don't want to be like boomer culture, and we want to be more in touch with things, and we want to be more aware, and we want to do this stuff. And I think that like the experience in a lot of conversations that I had where people for better or worse, in this age group, felt like we had to take on way too much. And we had to process like way too much, and had to like pull your bootstraps up,
Yeah.
like get it done, make it happen. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for emotions and feeling things like and let's not even get started, or maybe we do, on the fact that those are like not emotions and feelings, especially for
Right.
women, are like not something that anybody valued and growing up. So it's like there's these like microcosms inside of this like bigger thing that I think propels a lot of us in the direction of like feelings don't really have a place here. So that's why I think, to then bring it all the way home, inside of this grief and loss, I recognize that it's like, because I also didn't have a place to do it, that then I feel even more compelled that when people want to do that, when they want a safe place to do the human thing, I'm like, okay, I go to therapy. I have done all this work. I'm processing. So like, let me hold this for you so that you have a safe place to do it. Because like, I just, people just like don't have a lot of room or a lot of spaces to put what it means to be human. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, is like, we think about feelings, but we don't realize that like the feelings are actually feelings. Like, you're supposed to feel them. Like, we're intellectualizing all of our feelings. Like, oh, that made me happy, or that made me sad. And I'm like, tell me where you feel that.
Yeah.
Like, tell me where you feel it. And
like, what do you mean?
What?
I felt it. I just told you what I felt. So like I answered
that's
your question.
really sad. And I'm like, wait, tell me where you felt that. And people are like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And it's just like, and those kinds of conversations, because like you said, I mean, I'm not the only one that's dealing with all of these deaths. And so it's like, how do you navigate that process with other people in a way that doesn't like completely disassociate you from your own experience too? And that's really, really challenging. But like, the number one thing for me is this constant nag in the back of my head in so many areas of my life, where it's like, please keep showing up because they can't. And like, and make it something that's so true for you. I mean, my cousin was in a car accident when he was back in 2017, and died. And that was really because I'm also so far away. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and so I'm living out here in Oregon. And when that happened, it's also the proximity didn't allow me the same experience with these people. So, and I didn't go back for his service or anything like that, because honestly, for me, I've had to come to terms with, and this is like another layer where like my grief doesn't look like everybody else's grief. And so I didn't feel like I needed to do that because he wasn't there anymore. And one of the last conversations that him and I had was that his reflection about how proud he was of me for going out there and building my dream and doing the things that because I'm the only person in my family to leave Pennsylvania. And he just gave me that such beautiful reflection that I carry with me of like, he held space for me and saw my heart and saw what's passionate for me. And he was just like, I'm really proud of you for going out there and building your dream instead of building somebody else's. And that was really, really beautiful. And so when this tragedy happened and his life was over, I was like, if I go home, that's not going to be about me. It's going to be about everybody else feeling like I should be there.
Right.
Like, that was going to make it more meaningful. And I didn't go. And I, to this day, don't really know how my family really, really feels about it, but I could probably get really, really clear about it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's another layer on top of everything. It's like trying to decide how you want to do it and how you want to grieve and what that means for you, and honoring that no matter what it looks like to anybody else. And the shame that comes with like the expectations of other people inside of one of the hardest things that you have to come to terms with in your life.
Yeah. I mean, because I think if we go back to this idea that we're not really talking about death, we're not really talking about loss, we aren't getting at the meat of it. Again, we talk about sort of that's really sad, or that's really this, but we're not feeling it. We're not in it. Most people, I think, if they're being honest with themselves, if I asked them to define what grief looked like for them, they wouldn't be able to do it. They could probably name me the 5 stages of grief, even though that's only one of like 13 different main models for how grief looks. And the
Totally.
reality is what we know is everybody's grieving looks different. But I think the thing that happens is it is such a lonely, isolating experience. We do have so much fear. We already have so much shame. So when it happens, you've got this mixture of all these really yucky emotions that you don't quite know how to feel. But in that, in your grief, in your pain, in your rawness, shame comes in to remind you, well, if you don't know what to do, I've got you. Here's the checklist. This is how we grieve. We go to this stupid event, and I say that with love and kindness for me because I had a family very similar to you where everything was an expectation and it was performative. It was
Yeah.
never meaningful. It was never in honor of the person who died. All of the people that I have loved that died were not religious. And yet we had this very specific service. We did these very specific things. And the reason I say that term is, again, if that's meaningful for somebody, I want to honor that and value that. And I want to celebrate that for the person who died or the person who is grieving because it's meaningful for them. And it bothered me so much because it was like, well, here are these, this is what you do. You come home, you go to this event, you go talk to people that you don't like, that you have no real relationship with whatsoever. And then you process through it. And like a week later, everybody's fine. Right. And then we have these little memory moments and things come up, but that's the natural progression. And then we never get together. We never talk about it again. They might show up in conversation here or there, but you've always got somebody in the family who you can't talk about it to because it's too intense. And then you've got other people who have just like moved on.
Yeah.
For me, it was a lot of, I remember getting so frustrated because people would go out and drink in honor of my cousin. And that used to bother me so much because I'm like, you getting wasted and making poor decisions about driving drunk and doing other things is not an honor or reflection of his life.
Yeah.
But that was the bonding activity.
Yep.
And I think that's the really challenging part too for people is it doesn't feel like it's a decision that you get to make where you go, gosh, this is what my grief process looks like. This is what healing looks like. This is what me moving through this could be. Because for some people, going to that service, going to that memorial, going to that event is going to be what they need.
Yeah.
They need to feel that community. They need some connection to a higher power, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Being in a similar boat to you, when I've lost people, I didn't have a relationship with the people around them that were surviving. You know, the rest of my family, especially I think about 2 years ago, when my grandma died, I didn't have a relationship with any of the rest of them. So when everybody's flying back, I'm not going to spend $2,000 to fly me, my husband, and my, at the time, 2.5-year-old kid back to Wisconsin to spend time with people that I didn't even invite to my wedding.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how I want to function. But I think for people, it feels like now if they don't do that, now not only are they charged with this feeling they don't know how to move through, but the expectation feels like they've got to figure it out. And they have to figure out how to move forward in some way, whatever that looks like the time is still moving. So now they cling to this shame idea. So I better do this because I can't also be at risk of being rejected by the remaining people in my life, by them thinking I didn't do it right, by them judging me. My guess is when you're like, I could kind of imagine what some of them think. It's that because what they're doing is projecting the right way to grieve, but also their expectation on somebody else because they need it to look a certain way because in their mind, that's the only way they can move on.
Yeah. It comes back down to like this idea of what actual belonging means and like the expectation of how we're supposed to do it and that it's some like external finish line that that we're going to arrive at. And that dynamic and like even just that expectation again then goes back into because this isn't we don't have unlimited time here. So figure it out.
Right.
So figure it out. And inherently, you know, I mean, in a perfect world, you feel like you belong in your family. But like, if I think if we got really honest, like how as we get older, like how many people, like you get what I'm trying to say here, Kyira. Like how many people, like really, if you got really honest, feel that way. And so it's like, I just decided in honoring Collier's life. And then there's like a whole other part of this where it's like when I finally went home for Christmas, the upcoming Christmas was in 2008, in 2017, that now you're removed from their thing and you're trying to navigate how to be next to it and still hold what's true for you, like sacred. And like, you don't want to get defensive because like my uncle and aunt, their kid died.
Yes.
Like, so now it's like you're doing this dance, and I won't forget, we had a Christmas party that year and so much of my family was there. And like everybody was around, and obviously like there's an underlying current of like, everybody knows Collier's not here. And I feel like I can't bring it up. I can't talk about it. I can't say anything because, and I can't, I don't know, like close that grief loop for myself because he's not a part of my everyday life. So there's this weird, like it's in some part of my subconscious brain, like he's just on a vacation somewhere because I don't see him often. And so part of like that Christmas when I was home was trying to navigate how to be respectful of their grief because it's like losing a child I can never, ever, ever imagine. And I hope I never have to. So it's like respecting that, like very, very raw and awful experience for them, while also wanting to be like, yeah, he really mattered to me. I loved him and and you're my family and I like want to hug you. And this whole Christmas party went by. And it was this thing that like was living inside of me, like this dance, this like weird thing where it's like, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Like I want to talk about him. I want to, tell them about this conversation that Collier and I had the last time we talked. But it's like, is that rude? Is that insensitive? Because if they don't bring it up, then am I allowed to bring it up? And it got to the point where they were quite literally leaving. They were in the car, ready to pull away. And I ran outside. And I opened the door and I just gave my uncle a hug and I cried and I just said, I miss him. And like, it makes me emotional to this day because it's like, did I get what I needed out of that experience? Like, did it make me feel better? No, not really. Because like, it was like, but I had to like, let that honest grieving part of me exist somewhere. Like she had to, because if I didn't, it's like, I don't even know if I would have processed anything for myself. It wouldn't have made it real because nobody talked about it. Right. And like in these small moments, like you said, like people mention him or bring him up, but like, am I allowed to have like a full on grieving experience in front of all of you if I didn't do it the way that you expected me to do it? Am I allowed to have that?
I mean, I think it's even the third layer, and that is for a lot of people. Wow, we are
building an onion here.
I know. I'm really thinking about Shrek because I think about when he's trying to talk about layers and the donkey's like really upset that he's using onions. He's trying to think of anything that's not as gross as an onion. But I do think a big part of it is like, so now if we go even deeper in it, it's you are a feelings person. You hold a lot for other people. You've told yourself you're not allowed to take space. You're not allowed to see yourself the way that you want to see everybody else and give them that space.
Yeah.
So there's that happening. That's your norm. That's your baseline. Now you have this terrible tragedy for different sets of circumstances and reasons you're not going back. For me, it was a lot of the person I'm grieving was very important and special to me. The people that are getting together to celebrate her are not the people I'd feel safe grieving with. I don't want to be there and do that. I need to grieve in my own way. And I have people that I'm willing to process that with. So I had this like, the shame of you're supposed to do this, you're letting people down and having to work through that, because I think the expectation is always that you're supposed to do things a certain way. And if they don't match that expectation, you're somehow fucking up. So there's that piece.
Yeah.
But the third part is also that in that moment, your conditioned response was to think about everybody else's grief experience. So you sharing anything about your own grief, your own process would have felt like you were superseding theirs. You were taking over. You
Yes.
were taking up too much space because your norm was not to take up any. And so I think that piece for you of recognizing there's a way that everybody can hold space for their grief and actually connect through it instead of feeling like we're playing the comparison game. And I think people do that a lot too. Like, well, but they just lost this. That's how it relates to them. Or we will almost dismiss somebody's right to be grieving because, well, that was just, they didn't know them very long. That was just this person. And so it's all becomes comparison driven, which then layers a third part of expectation on it of then what your grief process is supposed to look like and how much space you can take up. And so I think what I learned is by not going to some of those events, by taking the space, I actually got to experience the loss through the lens that I was going to integrate it through. Because it was very much like that wasn't my norm. I didn't spend time with them when these people were alive. That wasn't going to be the thing that was going to help me. And I didn't need them to move on. And they didn't need me. They didn't need me to come in there. Because
Yeah.
what I would have done is come in, had a fake interaction, and then held it for everybody else and left exhausted and then feeling like I couldn't grieve. And I knew that.
Ooh.
But then recognizing once I was able to do that, I could receive other people's grief a little bit more openly once I moved through. I am curious as I'm saying this, though, a couple things come up to me because I think if we're going to keep building the onion, the fourth layer of it,
The 44th layer, Kyira.
yeah, right. Let's be honest, is this idea that there's also a lot of myths and misconceptions about grief. So I'm highlighting the one, there's a right way to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to these funerals, you go to these events, you come home, you spend the time with family, like whatever traditions are in your culture, your familial and sort of larger expansive cultural norm. There's that. There's the second layer of, kind of thinking about whose grief is more valuable. So we do that comparative suffering piece. But I'm also thinking about a lot of other norms and expectations that are created that are really just myths. And I'm curious if you notice that for yourself or like as you now make space for your clients that you work with, where it's you recognize they have other sort of untruths and expectations that are also getting in the way of them feeling their grief or you feeling your grief in the ways that was most helpful.
Yeah. Thank you for asking this because it's so communication. Like the stories we tell ourselves about other people. Like we live in outside of our heads every day.
Mm-hmm.
But the barriers that we put up and the stories that we tell ourselves to prevent ourselves from talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and not even just like talking about loss or talking about whom we lost, but giving ourselves space to talk about our like the space that we take up or the space that we want to take up. And something that because this whole, hey, can we talk about this? Or, hey, can we, it has such a negative stigma.
Yes.
Like, can we talk? It carries so much baggage and so much.
Yeah, the hairs on my neck are going up right now, and you're not even talking to me. It's an example, and I'm like, oh, I don't like it. Yeah,
and it's like this cringe, and so like anything that falls under that category of like let's like have a conversation already carries this like negative stigma, and I think that inside of these conversations, when it comes to not only talking about the hard parts, but, wanting to celebrate somebody or like a memory that you have. And so this like myth around like, we can't talk about it.
Yeah.
Or like this, like, can we talk stigma? It's like, why, in my opinion, it's like it's saying, I am bringing this here because I trust you.
Yes.
And because I'm trying to do something for us and for me and for this and this space and this container. And I trust you to be able to hold that. So this is the bridge that I'm building here. And like, I would like us to, in whatever capacity, I know that the expectation is like, you want to meet halfway in the middle, but can you just like stand on the bridge with me?
Yeah.
Can you just stand on the bridge with me? And whatever the topic is, it's like a lot of people are just like, the moment we get there, it's like, oh no. But then inside of this, like every time, a memory like a collective like memory comes up or a song comes on, Collier had a favorite song. And so like these things come on and like, it's like, are we allowed to can I build a bridge here? Like, can I talk about it at all? Can we talk? Can we mention him? And so I think that there's, I call it the communication gap of like the world that we live in, where like people, anytime we want to walk in some direction that makes us inherently uncomfortable, just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's harmful.
Right.
And like, that's the gift of what we get to do with our prefrontal cortex and our community, and like the gift of being a human, being able to like communicate in this way. And it's like, what can you just stay? Can you just stay? And this myth that like the walls will come crumbling down.
Yeah.
That like I say this to people often, is like the fear response, whether or not you're standing on the side of a puddle you don't want to, or like you don't want to fall in, or you're standing on the edge of a bridge, like the chemical response is very like similar. And just being able to sit with like that, you're not like, this is not gonna like, what does everybody say? Well, you didn't die. Well, you're not gonna die. The irony of this conversation. It's like, I just really like, my one hope is that people would be able to discern the difference between uncomfortable and harmful communication, or like, and harm inside of communication, and that we would trust our resilience and our tolerance to stay. And that like myth that we can't talk about people that have died. Where does it live? Where we still can't be joyous about the fact that they were here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it layers in the part that I struggle with too. So my mother-in-law just lost one of her best friends growing up, and they had a very complicated relationship. I think like anybody that's known somebody for, 4+ decades, like things ebb and they flow and you evolve and you become a different person. And they were in such an iterative process of figuring out where they were. And then this death happened. It was a very tragic loss. Like she was diagnosed with a form of cancer, and then she died less than a year later. And it was a very rapid deterioration. And she went home to Wisconsin to go to the funeral, and she had the most wonderful. So she is somebody where funerals are really healing for her. She really bonds through that sort of communal aspect. I'm sure some layer, if she was here with us, she'd be like, I also relate to the expectation piece that we're talking about. And she really responds to that. She had this beautiful time with her friend's husband and son and other people, and just really honoring and celebrating, but also talking about the shitty stuff, the really hard, how their relationship wasn't in its best spot when she died and how that sucks. And it feels like a different level of resolve. So she comes home on a Wednesday. I saw her on a Friday. So almost a week after the funeral, but not even 2 weeks after her friend has died. And she's like, I'm trying to really focus on the positives and focus on these things. And you could tell, because she's like, sometimes things are still sad. You could tell what she's doing is like, well, I did the things. I went to the funeral. I had these moments, probably some sort of an internalization of there's a timeline for grief. So I had my time, but also I should be through this now because I did it. I did the checklist. And so then when she was talking, and I was like, I could be wrong. I wonder if you're asking yourself to be in a different place than you actually are. I wonder if you are writing a timeline that doesn't match what your body is really needing.
Yeah.
And what would it be like if you were still sad, if you weren't fine for a while? What's the fear? And I think that layers into what you're saying of just, we have so many fears about we're going to say the wrong thing. People are going to judge us. We're going to get stuck there.
Yeah.
If I feel it, I won't get through it. But also, like, even going back to your Christmas party piece, we take on so much responsibility for having to know how somebody else would respond to something that feels really authentic to us. Instead of saying, I trust enough in that relationship to know that I can say that and we will be okay. And if we're not, if this was an irreparable situation that happened, our relationship probably wasn't that smooth to begin with.
Yeah.
Because I need to trust that it would be okay if sometimes I do overstep or I say the wrong thing or they can't receive something. That's on them to tell me, not on me to make that decision ahead of time. And again, pulling this full circle, because I know we're at time, is the same piece of you saying the fear of like, can we talk? What the reason people are so afraid is the projection they have because they've lived their life in shame mode of like, everyone's going to see me. I'm the fucking problem. They're going to yell at me. So I can't do that because it's going to be too hard and I'm going to get stuck there, or I'm going to be rejected and it's going to be too painful.
Yes. Yes, Kyira, yes. Like, it's just like we are more capable and resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And that is the thing that when, like, there can be joy. Like that is like, if I was like, how do I sum up what you were asking me in the myth and all of this? It's like, there can be all of it and there's no timeline for any of it. And you know, people that grieve their pets, oh, like it was just a dog, or like, oh, people that it's like you allow people to have their experience and stop. Like if we could just give more grace in for ourselves in like, if we say the wrong thing, then I have to trust that like that's your job. Stop taking away like the opportunity for growth. Like stop taking the opportunity for
and connection.
Yeah, like yes, exactly. Like it's like trying to prevent the bad thing from happening.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but in the case of grief and loss, it's like the bad thing already happened. And can we all just hold space for everybody else's experience inside of it? And if my experience is, like you said, crossing a line or crossing a boundary, I have to trust that you're going to tell me. And if you don't, that's not on me, because I should just be able to live. And when it comes down to all of the work and talking about fear and talking about death, and it's like, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? And the only person, when I didn't go home for his service, the only person that I knew at the end of the day that, you know, all of these years later that I really have to answer to for not following through with that ritual, or not in just about anything in life, not living in a white picket, I live in a van. Like, and I like the only person that I have to keep coming home to is me. And inside of all of this, whether it's the propelling myself to try to make my life meaningful, to try to make my message worth, whatever that means, like worth saying, doing something. It's like, at the end of the day, I hope more times than not, we realize that the bravest thing we can do is just be who we are. And that's the most thing that any of them that aren't here anymore would ever want for us. And if it's messy, let it be.
Yeah. And I think that is such a perfect way to wrap up the onion, which probably has, 74 plus more onion layers that we could add. Yeah, there's probably so many more, but I think it is that of realizing where we get stuck in the unhelpful suffering is when we allow our fear and our shame brain and all that external pressure to consume us in a way where we lose ourselves in that. And so it isn't that pressure to have to make your life meaningful is about external validation and approval as well. It's about a culture of success looking a certain way. That pressure to grieve in a certain timeline is about being told when you were a kid, likely, that your emotions got in the way. They weren't helpful, so get your shit together because we've got stuff to do. Instead of realizing that, you wouldn't even diagnose somebody with any grief-related diagnosis till at least a month, typically 6 months. It literally says it in the DSM. If it's within a 6-month period of any sort of major loss or grief, it doesn't even have to be a death. We don't touch it because it's normal. Like that is what our brains and bodies needed. And that is figuring that you're actually taking the time and space to do it. Not that you spent that 6 months trying to stuff it down because it shouldn't be there. And so all of this, I think, is about, again, not trying to skydive every day, but also not saying that every moment has to be about saving for retirement. Like finding that balance of what's authentic, what is valuable to me, what are the values, the intentions, the dreams, the goals, whatever it is that embody you as a person, and how do you seek out the courage and the support and the skills where you need them to embody that.
Yeah.
So then in your case, gosh, you not going back to that service was a stark step in a different direction than the you that was carrying everybody on your back for so many years. And it probably felt like you were the villain in the story. But what it was showing your brain, gosh, I'm not doing this to hurt anybody. I'm doing this for me to heal.
Yeah.
And I'm never once going to tell them that they can't heal in their way. I'm just allowing myself to not be told by someone else how I'm supposed to do it too. And that piece is, I think, the gift when we can allow the reality that death is inevitable to come in, is then realizing, like you said, the person you come home to every day is you. That's the longest relationship we're ever going to have.
Yep.
What does that look like to be less worried about someone else's perception and more okay doing the hard and shitty and scary things that you ultimately want and are choosing to do so you can live that embodied life?
Yeah. Yeah. I just got a tattoo. It says the brave thing.
Ooh, I love that. I love it.
More times than not, instead of doing the easy thing or what's convenient, I want to remember more times than not to do the brave thing. And sometimes I'm like, crying lasts 8 minutes on average, by the way, everybody who's listening. So just like let it happen and count, literally set a timer, 8 minutes on average in the waves, of that. So like, then you won't cry, and then maybe you get another 8 minutes, but 8 minutes, like, not that bad.
Yeah. Like there's literally, if you could get stuck in an emotion, if that was actually a thing, then do you know how many people would stay stuck in happiness? Like if that was the thing, it's not like, I just think about that all the time. We would have figured out a way to stay there.
Yeah.
That's not what happens. Emotions happen in waves. You can't feel happy all the time, which also means you can't feel sad all the time or angry all the time. It's just not possible unless you avoid it, because then you will get stuck.
Yeah, then it
And the
becomes like a
stuckness
thing
is it.
inside of you.
Yes.
Yeah, then it becomes like a
Yes.
thing. It's like part of then your identity, and then we shape things around it.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother conversation for another day.
I know. Okay. So there are going to be people listening to this that are going to go, oh my gosh. So I completely understand why you described Cait the way that you did. And now I need to have that interaction with her. I need to have this magic in my life. Tell me, where's the best place for people to find and connect with you?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's where you can find all the things about fear. It's caitpearson.com. I'm sure Kyira will link it for you. But then I also have, it's called the 12th House of Wild Substack, where I write often about topics like the one that we were talking about here today. Just like I call it just like the invitation of another perspective. Like I'm just inviting you in to say, hey, maybe, and when we get a lot of blinders, we get a lot of, this is our routine. This is how we look at things. And that's just, part of our human experience and everything. And then I'm like, but what if we just one perspective shift this way? Like, what if we considered this? Have you considered this? And so that's 12thhouseofwild.com, which is my Substack. And then obviously always on Instagram. Then you can really see the unhinged behind the fear. You get to see the behind the scenes of how we deal with fear every day. People love when I eat poke and drink a dirty chai. They're like, that is fear personified. And I'm like, I live there.
I mean, you just do what you can, right?
Like fear in
you're
small
just
moments. Just be brave. Eat the poke and drink the dirty chai. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
Like, we're getting a little reckless here.
Yeah, I know. But I think I love it because I think it gives people different opportunities to figure out what dose they are ready to take on with this. Because for so many people, I've been there before. I think there's still things I'm like that with too, where I'm ready to listen and to sort of take in some of the information. I'm not yet ready for that information to be personal or personalized to what I might be experiencing. And so it's nice for people to know, okay, I'm ready to read. I might not be ready to engage. Or, you know what, I actually have been in that place now. I am ready to engage. And so I love that they have different options for how they can connect with you, and that you're going through your own journey with it all, that they're not just like, well, I have got this figured out and
Yeah.
everything is amazing. You're like, no, I recognize that I have had very big loss, which I have chosen to create gifts and opportunities in for myself to learn, because I see what happened when I wasn't doing that. And so now I'm going to recognize that I'm 33 and I've experienced these things that feel so painful, and that I've started to be able to make space to recognize how I responded and what does and doesn't feel good about that moving forward, to give myself compassion and love, because I did respond. I showed up for myself, whether it was carrying him on my back, doing whatever I did. My body and my brain did everything it could and tried to figure out the best way forward. And as I'm learning new ways to do that. And I want you to learn with me. And I think that's your beauty, is that, like you said in the beginning, you're going on a walk. You're not running them and just making it about them. It is, we're walking together. There's still exploration for both of us. I just want to share with people what I've learned, to make it feel maybe less like they have to chase so many different doors like I felt like I had to before I learned these things.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I say that people often ask, like, how are you so fearless? Or
Yeah.
like, how, and I'm like, it's not, fear will always come. Fear has
Hmm.
to, it has to come. But for me, fearless doesn't mean the absence of fear. It's actually reinforced resilience.
I love that. I
And
love that.
thank you. And that's what I do. I mean, the the baseline of working with me is something called an alchemy session, because literally I think that we can become so, our relationship with fear and these really like sensitive concepts can become, we can become comfortable enough that they actually alchemize to become the thing that propels us into courage.
Hmm.
And I think that's beautiful when you start opening those doors. And yeah, whether it's through just reading the things that I'm considering in my life, it's like I'm a student of all of it too, because it's
Yep.
something that we don't ever outgrow fear. So like,
Right.
let's just come along. I'm just uniquely qualified because of all of my life experience and my education to walk next to you as we do it. But
Yeah.
like, I can't lead you to my water, but we can walk to yours, like the
Yeah.
horse to water concept. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. Seriously, this is such a gift, and I'm
Oh, you're so
so, so
welcome.
grateful.
Thank you. I think this has been, again, I know everybody listening to this, I'm going to remind you all listeners that, especially when we know coming in, we were going to go there. We did a lot of layering. There's a lot of places that you allowed yourself to go. And so as you're walking away from this, take one thing. We don't have to take it all. You can come back. You can listen to it again. We're not asking ourselves to go from 0 to 100. We're noticing one thing that we can take with us, one thing we have the capacity for, and just hold it and walk with it for a little bit. And to remember that there are people like Cait, myself, other people in this world, in this space, that want you to regain that sense of trust in people around you, that others do want to hold it. They want to ask you how you're doing, and they're not accepting fine, because you deserve to share more than that with the world. And so, Cait, I just appreciate everything you offered to me to be able to be a part of this conversation with you, to our listeners. Listeners, I hope that you feel the same way I do in all of this, of just open. That's really all I'm carrying with me is right now, that open exploration. If there's anything that's really standing out to you, let us know in the feedback. Send me a voice memo, share in any of the
I would love
responses. Tell
that.
us what stood out, what you're learning. I want to be able to tell Cait what's coming up too. And maybe when we have our, 18 more episodes that are going to have to happen someday down the road, we can hit on those topics too. So otherwise, I will plan to see you all back here next Sunday. And again, Cait, thank you for this amazing opportunity.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.